Yeah, that's super helpful. So thanks, John. So we explored this idea of like saying that the fall can account for an explanation of animal suffering. So now I'd love to talk about like the aesthetic theodicy. It's something you
Yeah.
interact with a lot. So it's this idea of like maybe there's some sort of like great beauty that comes from maybe like a process of like a lot of animal suffering. So can you talk about like what this is and like can it answer the problem of animal suffering?
The well, to take a step back, one of the one of the things that defenders of evolutionary creationism underline is that the suffering of animals, if you look at it in a certain way, is not just bad; it's tragic. Tragedy, of course, has a long history in the discussion of aesthetics, going back to Aristotle, especially, who pointed out the value of tragedy. Um, and that's manifested in tragic plays that were being written by the Greeks. And, the tragedy, there's a beauty in tragedy that Aristotle writes about and others have written about, and a nobility in it. Uh, a variety of good things come from tragedy, tragic goods. And so some writers have argued that the lives of animals, especially if we think of predation, where one animal takes the life of another in order to live, you can turn that around and say the other animal gives its life sacrificially to the other animal so that it might live. There's a kind of virtue in that and a kind of beauty. Um, why do people drive hundreds of miles to witness an act of predation? A wolf chasing down. There is a terrible painfulness and badness about predation in some of those cases anyway. Not all of them, I would say. Some are pretty much just horrible. Parasites and various other creatures that just tear into higher animals. But there are many examples of life and death in the animal world that most of us would agree are quite beautiful in their own way, in a tragic way, not in a cheerful way, but in a sublimely tragic way. And so, if you think that's a good thing that goes together with the bad thing, then the question becomes: does it outweigh the bad? The death, the pain, the suffering that is involved in this beautiful thing. And I don't think it does, but I think it somewhat counteracts it. What we really need is a view. Well, let me say that uh, tragic goods are among the goods that evolution creates or helps to create. So if we wonder why would God use evolution as a means of creating species, well, maybe one part of the answer is that God wanted a lot of tragic beauty. Now that doesn't that I don't think you can rule that out right away, at least on Christian grounds, because I mean, look at how God chose to act in Christ. That is a truly tragic story, the Passion of Jesus, and many people have written about it's a terrible, horrible story, but there's a beauty, dignity, a nobility, a greatness, an aesthetic greatness about that story. We see it in art, we see it in drama, we see it in literature. Um, so it isn't really a stretch to think that the same God who acted in those ways with the sacrificial lamb known as Christ would do something comparable in nature. And I'm not the only writer who has compared the cross, the narrative of the cross, to the story of species. Some people have referred to the cruciform, the cross-like character of the story of life. This is a way of looking at it, and some argue, John Hout, very important thinker in this regard, he seems to think that the beauty, that kind of beauty, does outweigh and justify God in creating by Darwinian means, despite the suffering. From the book, I I agree with a lot of that. I think he's partly right, but I think it's really hard. I think it's really hard to argue in the end that this kind of tragic beauty and all the other goods that we can list that Darwinian evolution helps to create outweigh the magnitude of suffering that we're talking about. So we need I think we need a better way than that. It would be good anyway if we had a better way than that to think about God creating by Darwinian means.